Hey, welcome to Tabletop Skirmish Games. I'm Lee, and in this video I'll show you how I painted the Heart Eater from the Untamed Beasts. Here's the miniature we're going to paint in this video, another awesome miniature from a great warband, the Untamed Beasts. And in this video I'll show you step by step how I painted him with contrast paints, and you can use the techniques I'm showing here for all the miniatures in that set except for the Rock Tusk Prowler, but I'll do a separate video on that showing you how I painted that beast up. Okay, let's get started. So here we are, all primed, and I decided to do the base first. So the base is all painted except for the rim, which we'll do right at the end. And this miniature's been painted with the contrast undercoat, the Citadel colour Wraithbone paint, and assembled with the Citadel plastic glue. The paints we'll be using in this video are mostly contrast paints, but with a couple of layer paints as well. And the brush that I use in most of the videos is the Army Painter Wargamer character brush, but I've been recently using the Kolinsky No. 2 synthetic, which is an awesome brush. I can highly recommend it. Right, let's get started with the contrast Guilliman flesh, and this is going to go on all the kind of flesh areas, the arms, the chest and torso, and the legs. And you can see here I'm putting this on quite thick now, so I've not done anything except for the Wraithbone undercoat, so I want the Guilliman flesh to do all the shading for me here. And I'm loading that brush up, and I'm starting and trying to end the brushstroke where I want most of this Guilliman flesh paint to build up. So where I want most of the shadow, I'm starting the brushstroke there or ending it there. But you can see as soon as I put it on, this contrast paint wants to run into all those crevices and in between the muscles, and so this will give us a real nice dark shadow, and it works really well. All the flesh tones for the contrast paints are really good, and Guilliman flesh is just perfect. And you'll see from the other miniatures at the end of this video that I've used some of the other flesh colours, in fact all of them from the contrast range on this warband. But here we go, so I'm putting loads of paint on, and then I've got a bit of time here to keep moving that paint around. And so once I've got it where I want it, then I just leave it alone. But I've got a few minutes to kind of just push and pull the paint where I want it to go. Add a bit more if I want to add it into another kind of muscle to give that definition. Or if I found that I've got too much paint in one area, I just wipe my brush off on some kitchen towel or some paper towel, and then I just wick that paint away from the miniature and then push it to where I want it to go instead. So yeah, you've got a fair bit of time. Temperature plays a big part. If it's too warm, this paint's going to dry a lot quicker, so it's just getting that balance right. So that side done, I moved on to the other side, exactly the same, loading that brush up, pushing it, starting and finishing the brushstroke where I want most of the paint, and then just moving the miniature so it makes it nice and easy for me to get in there where I want to. And then when I'm happy I've got the paint in the right places, then I just leave it alone, because if you go over it too soon and try moving it once it starts to set, then you're going to get some kind of almost stain lines, and that looks really messy. So you know, you get used to it after a few models, and you know how much time you've got. But just take into account how much paint you're putting on, the temperature of the paint, the temperature of the model, even the temperature of the water you use when you kind of first moisten your brush. All these things come into play and will take effect. And here I'm just doing the face. You can see I'm pushing quite a lot into the eyes and the nose and the mouth there. And then moving on to the hands. Again, using the model and to start my brushstroke where I want most of the paint to go into the creases and where I want the darker tones to be, and I'm almost wiping the paint off the brush using the different textures and shapes of the model. So I decided to use the Untamed Beast to work through all the flesh tones and all the browns and leather kind of colours that come in the contrast range. So these are great models to experiment with, and I've pretty much used them all. Yeah, I've used all the browns and all the flesh tones. So on this model you'll see just the one Guilliman flesh tone, but you'll also see all the different browns, the leather, and the also like the goldy kind of tan colour as well. So this is a really good example of how all those browns work together and complement each other. So I was really happy how they worked on this, and we got a real wild looking kind of set of Untamed Beasts. And the idea was to have it all fur and leather and natural materials. Their weapons and armour, mostly bone as well, so that really worked nicely against those browns. Okay, now I'm going to take some layer paint, some Pallid Wych Flesh, and if you've got Wraithbone, the same colour that you've used for your undercoat, then go for that. But this is a stage that I do a lot throughout the kind of painting session to really tidy up all the different areas I'm going to paint. So before I move on to the next contrast paint, I make sure I go in and tidy up any lines, anywhere I've gone over the lines with any of the other paints previously, and I just make sure that's nice and neat, and make sure then the divide between the two sections of the model I'm painting with different colours have got nice crisp lines, and that gives us a real nice neat finish at the end, and that's what we're looking for. Okay, next, once that's dried, I'm taking some contrast Snakebite leather, and this is going to be for the straps you'll see on the front and a little bit of the belt as well. And I'm also going to do that big round buckle on the front. I'm going to do that in the Snakebite leather too. So far, I found with the contrast paints, these natural leather kind of fur colours are perfect for the contrast paints, and they work really nicely. And you know, we're looking for a tabletop ready standard here, nothing fancy. We're only putting pretty much one coat of each paint on, but these contrast paints, that's all it takes, one coat and you get a real nice effect. You know, I'm not doing any dry brushing, I'm not doing any highlights, and I've not done any undershading at all here. It's literally just the contrast paints, putting one coat of each colour on, and so I'm really happy with the results. And you know, for something that doesn't take too long, I think you get a good result from it. And tabletop standard doesn't have to be bad, it could be good, and as long as you just follow some simple steps with the contrast paints, such as starting and ending your brushstroke where you want most of the paint to build up, push and pull it around to where you want it to go into the darker areas, wick up the excess paint, and then keep your lines nice and crisp by tidying up with a layer paint in between the different colours, you can pull off some really nice results. For me, I also want this to be like a fun experience. I want to kind of build my confidence as I'm getting used to the paints, and I want a nice result at the end. And so the contrast paints work for me, so I'm really happy with them. And here you can see I'm just doing underneath the bit that's going to be a dark brown fur. This is like the underneath as if the animal's been skinned, so this is going to be that snakebite leather too. And so that's the final bit of the snakebite leather. A beautiful colour and a great contrast paint if you haven't tried it already. Okay, next we're going on to some contrast Basilicanum Grey, and I'm going to use this for all the straps around the calves and the forearms. This one you have to put it on quite thick if you want it, you know, dark. So again, I'm starting and ending the brushstroke where I want most of that shadow to be, and then I'm just using my brush to push it around. I'm going back and forth to the pot quite often, making sure I've got plenty of paint there, and making sure I'm also moving the miniature rather than moving myself. So I'm spinning it around all different angles so I can go in, I can brace my arms on the table, get a nice firm steady stance, and then I've got lots of control on the brush then as I move in. And you can see with this number 2 size brush, it's a bit bigger than the army painter brush, and that gives you a lot more control. It holds more paint, the paint's not going to dry out on your brush too quickly, and I find it's got a real fine tip, so you get lots of control and lots of detail with it. So there we go, I'm just finishing off that grey, and then we'll be moving on to the contrast Cygor Brown, and this is a real nice dark paint, and this is probably almost a bit darker than the Wyldwood. It may be a little bit the same, but it's almost got like a reddy tinge to it, but this is great. So I'm putting one real thick coat of this now, and with anything like these kind of furs or overlapping like feathers and things like that, it really, those gaps and crevices really suck the paint in, so you've got to be, you know, quite generous with how much you put on. And so I'm putting quite a bit in here, and then as I get to the edges I'm using less paint and then being a lot neater and a lot more controlled. If we go over, we can always tidy it up again with another stage with the layer paint, but you know, it's good to be careful and just take your time. And so here we are, spreading this all over and just leaving those 3 claws at the end because we're going to do those black later on. And so covering all this now, making sure I don't miss any spots, and giving it a nice generous coat of the Cygor Brown. And then when we get to the front where it meets that snakebite leather we've already painted, now's the time to really use the tip of the brush to get that nice crisp detail. Now I'm taking the contrast Wyldwood, and this is going to be for the boots, and this is going to give a nice dark leather look. And you can see the difference here with the Wyldwood and the Cygor. That Cygor's almost got a little red tinge to it, but they're almost as dark as each other. but this is just a good example of how using all the different browns together really stand out and work well together. I mean, so far we've used a few already and it's working really nicely. And just having that Basilicanum grey for the straps just breaks it up a little bit. And we're also going to do all the weapons and armour in like a bone colour. So, you know, it kind of works in this natural look, especially for the Untamed Beasts. Right, so I'm just finishing off the boot there, and then while that's drying, we're going to go back to the Pallid Wych Flesh, the layer paint, and I'm just going to tidy up, make sure I've got it nice and neat. And here I went over a little bit where the fur meets the cloak, so I'm just tidying that up. And then I'm going to take some Gore Grunta fur, another brown, and this is really nice. This is a great leather effect as well. I mean, the Snakebite leather's perfect, but this is a different colour altogether. This is very orangey red. It's almost like a dark version of the Snakebite leather, and I really like this. I think this worked out nicely on the Untamed Beasts. And the idea is that they kind of go to battle with like the Rocktusk Prowler, and anytime their Prowler is taken down, they make sure that they skin the beast and they wear the furs and the skin in honour of that beast. So that's what I'm kind of playing into the narrative. So they look very similar to the Rocktusk Prowler in their colour and how they're painted and everything. So there we go. You can see this is looking really nice there. Lovely colour. And so I'm just making sure I move the model again so I've got access to go in. Being really careful not to go over anything I've painted already. And using that number 2 brush to give myself a nice crisp line. And just running that brush down the edge and filling in the gaps. Also use this for the strapping around the weapon. And so I thought that worked nicely too. And so you can see I'm trying not to have one brown, the same colour brown, on 2 elements of the model next to each other. So there's almost one colour between each one. So we've got the Guilliman flesh almost acting as a barrier between the different colours and tying it all together, which worked really nicely. So there we go. There's also a little bit of binding here, so I wanted that to be that nice colour too. So I'm just going over that, again, just with the tip of the brush. And that's why this long number 2 is really good. It holds enough paint that it doesn't dry out and allows you to get stuck in. Right, now we're doing the cloak. And here, again, I've got loads of paint on now. You can see I've really loaded that brush up with 2 full brushfuls of paint. And I'm pushing it up to where the fur overlaps. And then that's going to suck it in to that line and create a little shadow. And then I'm pulling it down to cover the rest of the cloak. Now, I did overwork part of this. And I'll show you that mistake later on in the video once it's dried, so you can see what I did wrong, and then hopefully you won't make that same mistake. So you can see, though, this is the important bit, just getting loads of paint on. So it's almost a bit thin there. At this stage, I haven't got enough paint. I've gone a bit too thin, and that's what kind of contributes to the mistake later on as I try and fix it. So yeah, I've gone a bit too thin. So it looks like I've put a lot on, but I haven't put enough at all. So I'm going back in the pot now, and I'm going to put a bit more here. And this side worked out really nicely as I wanted it to, but the other side didn't. So, and then just on that edge, I don't want that to be as much paint, so I let the brush kind of run down and just leave almost a highlighted bit. But you can see it's gone into those shadows really nicely, giving us some nice deep tones. And then I'm going to go around, turn it around, and I'll just do the underside as well. And again, I'll be really generous with how much paint I use and try and give it a nice even coat all over. I really like this colour brown. I think this was my favourite out of all of them on this particular model, and it's a really good opportunity to use it before I paint my Beasts of Chaos, which I'll be painting next, and they're going to be used in the campaign, so you'll see those in loads of videos with all the battle reports coming up really soon. And there we go, that's still wet now, and it looks like a lot of paint, but because I haven't done like a Zenithal Prime, I'm using this to give me my shadow. So that's exactly what I want on the left side, and we'll see the mistake again later on. Right, now I'm taking the Contrast Skeleton Horde, and this is going over all the bones, all the weapons, and all the armour, like the shin guards, and also some of the horns. And again, with this, I'm going really thick. The Skeleton Horde paint dries quite thin, so if you put a thin coat on it, you're going to really see through it, and you're not going to get a lot of shadow. So if you want this to go into any like recesses, you have to put quite a lot. And so I'm being really generous here, pushing it in, again using the edges of the model to wipe the paint off my brush, and then start and stop where I want most of the paint to build up, and then push and pull the paint around. And when you put this amount on, you've got a good amount of time to work with it. And so, you know, you can take your time, don't rush it, be very neat once you start going to like near the arm or areas you've already painted, and just get that nicely covered with a nice generous coat of the Skeleton Horde. There we go. I'm also going in here on this skull. And you see I don't have enough paint there. So I loaded my brush up again. And that looks like I put way too much on. But that will suck right into the eye sockets, into the jaw. And then that will leave a nice finish. So that's how you want it really. Nice and thick in those recesses. And then it'll do its own work of kind of spreading out and leaving it itself nice and thin on the raised areas, which are going to be the more highlighted ones. You know, and if you wanted to, you could always go back once this has dried and go over those raised areas with like a layer paint, like a light layer paint, just to give that extra highlight. And you could use like a Pallid Wych Flesh maybe, something like that, or a different colour that was more kind of creamy, and then that would give you even more highlight. But again, tabletop ready here. So okay, now we're taking some Contrast Basilicanum Grey, and while that skeleton horde is still wet on the horns, I'm just putting that paint on and letting it then just soak in and bleed into each other. So that's an important stage. It's almost like a wet blend on the model. I'm just putting that on, letting it seep in. That's going to go into the recesses naturally because that's where we started. And on these kind of teeth that are coming out, I want those to be a bit darker too. So I'm running the tip of the brush down, and then that kind of Basilicanum Grey is going to get soaked in to the area where the tooth meets the kind of bone jaw. And then I'm using the tip of the brush just to flick it out a little bit, and that's going to give us some grey lines and give us a nice quick natural blend between the skeleton horde colour and the Basilicanum Grey, and it's going to give us a nice effect to break up that whole skeleton horde colour across the whole piece. And then I'm doing the same on these really long kind of fangs from whatever creature this was taken from, and so starting it and then just flicking that out, and not too much paint on my brush at this stage. Okay, next is the Contrast Black Templar, and this is going to go on the claws that are left on this skinned beast on the back. And so just pop in one coat of that on, and I'm not going to highlight it, but again, you could highlight it with a little bit of grey if you wanted to. Okay, and then I'm now going to take some Volubus Pink, another contrast paint, and I haven't got too much paint on the brush, and this I want almost like you would have the same amount as a felt tip pen you were drawing with, and I'm just going over these little scar lines, and I'm making sure I've got complete control here, and I'm nice position to do the line nice and straight, and I move the model rather than moving myself so that I'm in nice and control. And there you go, you can see that's going to give us a nice look. Really simple to do. Okay, now they've got some Leadbelcher Base paint, and this is going to go over the metal of the helmet and also this kind of horned symbol they wear on the front of their belt buckle, and doing that in metal as well. So going to give this a nice coat of Leadbelcher, and at this stage really careful not to go over any of the work we've previously done, and just trying to use the tip of my brush just to get those areas that are most raised away from that buckle, and then just turning the model again to catch the side, really taking my time and really in control of my arms, braced on the table so I'm not shaking too much, and then I'm going in nice and steady and getting that as neat as I can without making any mistakes. Then it's onto the helmet, and again move the model so it's in a nice position, and I'm giving that a nice coat, being very careful that the tip of the brush doesn't go into those kind of eye sockets and into the mouth, so I'm being really careful there, almost using the side of the brush when I approach that so that it's not possible for it to accidentally flick in. So really taking my time, and you can see there I'm using the side of the brush so the tip's not going to accidentally go into those eye sockets. And then these horns I thought I'd do metal, and also the little Chaos star that they wear on the top. They've all got these on their body somewhere, and so I'm doing that in a nice metal as well. And we're going to make this gold once we've given it a nice coat. And then finally, this is the last part of the metal work, which is the chainmail, and this is just the little bit down the front. So we'll give this a coat, and we'll do a quick wash on that, and that's all we're going to do with the metal for this mini. So that metal is drying, and now you can see the cloak has dried too. And if you look on the left hand side, it's exactly how I wanted it. Two tones, nice and dark, and also light on the raised areas. But on the right, it's almost like textured, and I didn't want that to happen. The mistake I made there was I didn't put enough paint on the first go, and it's really important to do this in one go. So I went back while it was still wet and just added a bit more paint, but it had already started to dry, and it gave us this kind of weird look. So I messed that up a bit, but I'm not too worried. I'm going to leave it as it is, but you could strip it back, do a coat of layer paint, and then go back over it with a contrast. But I'm going to leave it as it is, because I think it's good to see those mistakes, and then we can move on and learn from them. Next is the Contrast Aggaros Dunes, and this is going to go over the belt buckle metal work that we did, and also the helmet. So I'm going to keep that chainmail silver. So this is just going to go over this kind of horns and skull, and then cover that with a nice coat of Aggaros Dunes, and that's going to give us a little gold effect, but it's not going to be really bright, so it's going to give us a nice kind of dirty gold that's going to tie in with all the brown tones we've used, and it's going to fit nicely with the model. And so giving that one coat all over, not too thick, not being too generous here, and then that's going to give it a nice gold look. And then finally some Knoll oil shade, and that's going to go over all the chainmail at the front of the model. And so again, not too much, so I've got complete control here. I don't want this to run over onto the leather kind of cloak that they wear and things like that, so I don't want it to mix with the other colours, so being very careful now. And then the final stage is to take some black and grey. Any grey or black is going to do, and I mixed 2 parts grey to 1 part black. Then I took some blue tack on the end of a brush, popped my model on there, and then this is going to be a little turntable so we can paint the rim of the base. And this is a really important stage. You've got to paint the rim. I mean, this really finishes the model off, makes it look really neat and tidy, and is a great way to finish it. But don't think you always have to do it black. I go for different colours that either complement the model or complement the textures and design I've used on the base. So here I've gone for a grey base, and so I've gone for like a grey paint around the rim, and it will dry a little bit darker, but it all works nicely to complement it, and it also ties in with the straps that you'll see on the model. That's all the painting done, and so I'm going to finish off with some tufts, and these are the winter tufts. I'm going to glue them on with Gorilla super glue, so I'm just putting a little blob of glue in there, using some tweezers to pick up one of the little tufts and then popping that in there. So I want this to be nice and overgrown, like the kind of civilization has been destroyed and there's all this kind of grass grown over it. And there you can see I put 3 different size tufts around the model, and they're all going to work really nicely in with the rubble. And there we go, there's our Untamed Beast, all painted with contrast paints to a tabletop ready standard, and I'm really happy with how he turned out. I was really pleased with this, and those browns all work together really well. So I really like the natural look of this model. Those browns really work well in with the bone and everything, and then that helmet in gold just to finish it off. I think that worked nicely. A little bit of pink's really cool as well, but the base having that grey matching the straps works really nicely, and I'll put a video for how I made the bases on the channel real soon so you can see that too. And all the paints and techniques we use in this video you can do for all the models that come in that Untamed Beast set, and if you want to change the skin tones then just swap the Guilliman Flesh for the other contrast paints. And I'll do a separate video for the Rock Tusk Prowler so you can see how I did that. Again, the same colours but just a little bit different in how he was put together. Awesome mini, I really love that one. And everything I used, I'll put links in the description below, and there'll be links to Element Games, where there'll be affiliate links, but you can save up to 20% there, and it doesn't cost you anything extra, and any sales made through those links, I get a small commission, and that's going to help me develop the channel and create many more videos like this. So thanks so much for that support, I really appreciate it, and you can even enter a code there that gets you some element crystals, so you can save money on your next purchase, and as a bonus, I get some too. Thanks so much to everyone who's joined the Patreon community. It's really awesome to have your support, and I really appreciate it. And if you'd like to support the channel, then please take a look at my Patreon page. I'll put a link for that in the description below. It'd be awesome to see you there, and then you can join the community and get some content there that you're not going to find anywhere else. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it helpful. I love painting these and can't wait to get them on the table doing battle with perhaps the Beasts of Chaos, so that's going to be real fun, and hopefully you'll join me on the Beasts of Chaos campaign to watch the battle reports and see how they do. But thanks so much for watching. Please like if you like it, subscribe for more videos like this, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to join me next time on Tabletop Skirmish Games.